Ready?
I'm ready.
Okay.
Well, go ahead and you start.
Me start? Okay. If you haven't heard of us before, we're RetroBlasting. We're a video channel. We've been around since May of 2012. We did MobaCon last year. We're going to be at Emerald City Comic Con this year, but we're celebrating our second convention here at Pensacon with everyone here. So thank you for having us. We're really excited to be here. This is Melinda. I'm Michael. And I guess we'll get started. So we're talking about Adventure Quest heroes. Just to set some parameters for you, there are a lot of adventure heroes. There are sci-fi adventure heroes. There are fantasy adventure heroes like Harry Potter. We're referring specifically, we're putting ourselves in a little sandbox. We're referring to Adventure Quest heroes, you know, Indiana Jones, Lara Croft, Nathan Drake, because we could be here for 5 hours or 5 days talking about every type of adventure hero there is. So this is where the discussion point starts.
Again, you know, Michael already talked about the fact that we're RetroBlasting. We do a web channel. A lot of what we do involves, we do toy restorations. We do reviews of 80s and 90s cartoons and toys and all that kind of stuff. So we kind of have like that whole 80s vintage toy cartoon thing going on. But we do fully produced videos that are scripted and
yeah,
fun.
We don't do the monitor webcam where it's like, I just saw the RoboCop remake and I wanted to give my thoughts on it. Like, it's not that kind of video. They're like scripted, produced, so.
Yeah. So in terms of our background regarding this, Michael has written for the Raider.net, and so he has a lot of experience with Indiana Jones in particular. I don't know if you want to talk about
that. I wrote for Raider.net for a number of years, talking purely about Indiana Jones, Alan Quartermain, all these different characters, and so it's kind of a thing. It's one of the hats I wear. So
no pun intended again. And I actually have a master's in archaeology, anthropology. So a lot of these characters resonate with me because of that. You know, I'm sitting there going, hey, it's sort of like, you know, I do forensic anthropology and I do archaeology. So it's like Bones and Lara Croft. You know, I like to pretend that I'm carrying a gun while I do my awesome job. So, and then we also do cosplay as the characters. We've done, you know, Michael's got the full Indiana Jones get up, and I did Lara Croft a couple years ago, which was really fun with the giant gun, walking out into the street of Atlanta at Dragon Con, and we saw the cop sitting there, and I'm like, this is going to be a problem, and the cop just looked at me and he goes like, nice. So that was pretty cool.
Okay, so adventure heroes have been around forever, but they were really popularized in the 1930s and 40s on film. We kind of looked back on the history of this and we said, well, where can we start? Because we can go all the way back to sword and sandals mythology and talk about adventure heroes, but we're talking about quest heroes. We're talking about people looking for lost treasures in ancient civilizations. And so we thought, well, let's start with H. Rider Haggard's novel, King Solomon's Mines from 1885, which introduced Alan Quartermain, who has been, you know, adapted and sometimes bastardized many, many times in film history, Richard Chamberlain notwithstanding. And that's really where it's... Yeah, we're going to point out some that don't stink. But in the 1930s and 40s, the adventure hero really took hold in film and in popular fiction. They were largely swashbucklers, vigilantes, people like Seahawk, Zorro, Robin Hood, but there were also other characters that we're going to talk about that were quest heroes. The common theme that runs through all of these movies, whether they're quest heroes or swashbucklers, is that it has a very lighthearted tone. Like, they're in danger, but it's like fun danger. It's like, gosh, I wish I were surrounded by 20 pirates because I know I couldn't die. Like, it's this whole sort of attitude that's really cool. So, yeah, so Robin Hood and Seahawk are both Errol Flynn films, but they're two main examples of how this genre was taking off with such popularity. But then we have to talk about the quest heroes in this period. The adventure quest hero is different in that they go on a quest to find an object of mythic importance that's lost to time. They're either an archaeologist or a fortune hunter. They don't necessarily have to be academic, which, depending on what you prefer, can be problematic or not. Depends on what you like. And in many cases, a lot of these characters are skeptics. They're the ones that kind of get dragged into the adventure, and you think, wait, why is the bookworm dragging this cool person into this adventure? But the cool guy or girl is the only one that can really solve the problem. And at the end of it, as you know, they become a believer. So
Yeah, it's sort of like the whole Mulder Scully thing, like the adventure hero is kind of the Mulder, or the Scully, and it's like, I don't really believe this, but I'll go along with you for the ride. And then by the end, it's like, hopefully not exactly like season 9 of the X-Files, where the person's like, yeah, I totally believe, and I've completely changed my character.
Yeah, so this genre has always been about exotic locales. It's been about going places that you might not be able to go in your normal life and seeing amazing things that you might not ever really get to see. Legends and mysteries of the past that we all kind of fantasize about, wishing were real. All of us kind of want to go look for the Ark of the Covenant. We might never actually do that, not just because of the militant unrest in parts of the world, but also just because we don't have that kind of money. And it blends the characters, the main characters, the protagonists. They're kind of like this perfect mix of nerd and, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Not Arnold Schwarzenegger, that's a little ridiculous. But they're like the perfect mix of a hero and a nerd.
Yeah, so that's kind of appealing for a lot of like geeky nerd bookworm types to imagine themselves being able to be the hero. So, basically turns this guy into this guy, which is pretty cool. So we're going to talk about the Quest hero in sort of 3 general time periods. So we've got the classic period, which we've already kind of talked about. We've got the 80s and 90s, where things are sort of transitioning over. And then we've got the 21st century, which is, now and where are we going from here. So we've already kind of talked about the classic period with King Solomon's Mines, the book coming out in 1885. And then in the 30s, they kind of had a boom of these types of films and serials in the theaters and stuff like that, where they had these sort of, like Michael was saying, lighthearted sort of escapades that these people go on. And then there was sort of another lag. And then in the 50s, we had Secret of the Incas that came out.
And if you haven't heard of Secret of the Incas, prepare to have your world rocked. So the characteristics of these from the 1930s and 40s are always that they're set in the past. Like, we're used to seeing movies set in the 30s, which is like the past.
Or in the now.
Or in the now. But these films were made in the 30s and 40s and set in the 19th century. So they were even going back to what they felt was a more nostalgic period of time to deal with these adventures. Because I'm sure back then the Bakelite telephone was just too fancy to have their characters using. It's one of those things.
Well, that's another thing I wanted to point out here is that, part of the element is taking people, putting them in these remote locations so that they don't have whatever the conveniences of that time are. So, like, as we'll talk about later, if you set something now, everyone's got cell phones, and everyone's, the only way you can really get around the technology and the advantages of having that technology is to put someone in a foreign land or put them in the past or both to take away some of the ease of accomplishing their mission.
Right, or put them on the T-Mobile network because it's crappy. Like one of those things. So these are about, going abroad, but these films were interesting in that there wasn't a lot of esoteric magic or legend going on with these. It was more just about the treasure itself. They built up the loot, the booty, as being, mythic, as an object. But there wasn't this sort of like ancient mystery to solve. It was more just like, hey, someone buried treasure over there a long time ago. So I heard. No, they didn't. Yeah, they did. Let's go find it. I want to be rich. Like, that was kind of the main thrust of those films. And these films deal with Western explorers dealing with the local culture as interpreted through 1930s and 40s films. So the political correctness factor is very low at this point. But they're still cool because it's about dealing with the hurdles that you run into in foreign cultures, as well as looking for that treasure that has theoretically been theirs for I don't know how long, how many centuries, depending on the story. So.
Right.
Now, here's where we get to Secret of the Incas, and I wanted to bring this up for anyone that doesn't know about it. This is a Charlton Heston film from 1954. It was done by Paramount Pictures. It is now in public domain, so you can actually watch it in 9 parts on YouTube. Just letting you know. But does he look familiar to you as a character? I mean, I don't want to like stretch anything here, but I think he kind of looks familiar. Can someone tell me who he looks like?
Hi, Indy.
Yeah, Indiana Jones. He's got a revolver, he's got the hat, he's got the jacket, he's got the khaki pants. Like, it's crazy. He's even got the bag. So check this out. So this is a scene from Secret of the Incas that's pivotal to the film, where he's looking for the Mayan or Aztec sunstone. He goes into the temple. He sees this little place right here. What am I going to do? Well, I've got this medallion. I'm going to put it here and reflect the light. Bing! So Secret of the Incas was one of these fictional adventure films from the 50s that really influenced our adventure movies today. And that's as you can see, that's what helped him find the treasure. Well, we've seen that in Indiana Jones. How many times have we watched that movie cumulatively between all of us? 1,000, 1,500 between all of us in the room?
Well, 1,000 for you.
Yeah,
right?
1,000 for me.
That makes at least 20,000.
That's right. That's right. So, 1981, Indiana Jones shows up. He's clearly inspired by Secret of the Incas and Alan Quatermain from King Solomon's Mines. The movie is a mega hit, and it revitalizes the adventure genre, because in the 70s it was kind of dead because everybody was watching Woody Allen movies and whatever. So everybody was bored with that, and they were like, you know what, I'm tired of New York in the 70s. I'd really like to get a cool movie going. So we've all seen Raiders of the Lost Ark. I don't have to espouse about that very much. But
interestingly, it's set in the 30s.
Right.
Where, like, we were in the 80s by that point. So 30s movies were set in the past, and now in the now, meaning the 80s, because my mind is stuck
It's
there.
like the 50-year rule.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like in the 30s or 40s, they would set things 50 years before in 1880 or 1890. And in the 1980s, we set things in the 30s. It's this weird kind of like, what?
Past is always cooler.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. Exactly.
Because I think that's the sort of how far you have to go before the technology is different enough for it to be like, oh, it would have been really hard to live in that time. I can't even imagine it. Of course, now that has decreased. So, like, people can go 10 years ago and go, wow, cell phones were so big. So, I don't know.
Well, but how exciting is it for a guy to be in a truck chase wearing Lucky Brand? Like,
So these are some of the other films that were really popular because of the popularity of Indiana Jones. Not to say that these are all rip-offs of Indiana Jones, but, Hollywood certainly took notice of how popular Indiana Jones became, and so they were like, hey, how can we kind of cash in on this and sort of make a lot of other similar type movies? So
yeah, and I'd just like to give everybody fair warning. All of these films are excellent except Sphinx. Don't watch it. If you do, I hope you really like boring movies, because it's really boring.
Yeah.
It's so boring, there's no really, if you notice the poster, there's no real big hero standout.
Yeah, the only thing good about the posters is the same artist that did the Star Trek posters in the 80s. Other than that, it's the only thing I had going for it.
Characters shouldn't blend into the background.
That is a good point.
Certainly not these type of characters, right?
Yeah.
They need to stand out.
Yeah.
Right.
What's
Right.
That's a good
I don't
point.
think Leslie Ann Down ever stood out in anything.
Well, there was that one time.
Bless her heart. So in the 80s, like I said, they were cashing in on the adventure craze, which is what Hollywood does best. Some of the differences are that the characters are looking for loot, but it's not the end of it. Like, it's not about getting the cash. It's more about getting the cash so that they can do something with it. Like in the Goonies, it's so that they can, save their town. And in terms of High Road to China, it was so that he could get money to build up his fleet so that he could be more effective in his career and things like that. So it's not just, I want to be a rich dude. It's more about, being more successful because of what the money
Yeah,
can
like
get
in
them.
Romancing the Stone, Jack Colton isn't looking for the money for the sake of being rich. He just doesn't want to keep capturing birds in Colombia anymore. He's like, I want a boat, and I want to sail, and I want to go somewhere. It's not so much about being wealthy. It's
Right.
like, I just want to better my station in life.
Right, which is a fine nuance, but it is kind of different. And then, of course, there's the woman factor. So, in the older films, including Secret of the Incas, it's the woman is kind of very peripheral to the plot. She's just there, and she kind of wants to hook up with the cute guy with the cool knapsack, but, it's not really about her in any way. And so now, we've got people like Marion here who's, a really strong female character. Now, while she's not the one who's got the whip and the gun and all the cool stuff, she's still formidable on her own. When you see her at the beginning of the film, she's certainly holding her own in the drinking game,
Right, and there's the extended conversation that he has with her in the beginning that shows the complexity of that relationship, which would never have happened in any of these other films. Like, in King Solomon's Mines, the girl is just the person who kind of brings Alan Quatermain the job, and then she's just kind of in the way for the rest of the film. Whereas in Raiders of the Lost Ark, there's this whole history. She's like, I was in love and you knew it, and I was a child, and he's like, you knew what you were doing, and all this kind of stuff. That's character development that is never been in these kind of adventure films before, and so it makes Marion pivotal to the story. And so when you think she dies in the middle of the movie, you feel it just as much as he does. So now I wanted to detour for a second and talk about this, because while we all know, I think safely, And if anyone here doesn't share my opinion, that's okay, because I don't judge anyone. If you really think that Indiana Jones 4 was a good movie, then I won't judge you. But before...
Raise your hand. Be sure to tell everyone.
Aliens don't belong in Indiana
Thank you.
Jones.
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry.
Right. So before Indy 4, a lot of people said that Temple of Doom was the worst Indiana Jones movie. But here's the deal. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom was not only set in 1935, 1 year before Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's not, I don't even consider it a prequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark because it's not a related story. It doesn't roll into Raiders of the Lost Ark. I'm hoping that what I'm about to show you will make you at least respect Temple of Doom a little more, even if you still don't like it, which is cool.
It's actually my favorite.
Yeah, I love Temple of Doom.
I love it.
All right, so Gunga Din, which we mentioned previously, is a Cary Grant, Douglas Fairbanks Jr. Adventure story set in India. Now, what a lot of people don't realize, and because a lot of people, I would say 80% of the people that have seen Temple of Doom have never seen Gunga Din. Gunga Din and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom are directly related to one another. Like, I mean, they mention Gunga Din in Temple of Doom. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. They both start with a gong. They both start with a bar fight where, in the case of Gunga Din, Cary Grant is trying to buy a map off a guy to find a buried treasure. In Temple of Doom, he's trying to get the diamond from Lao Che. Then they are taken to a village that has been completely abandoned or turned into a wasteland, and they don't know why. And they both find, in both films, they find evidence of the Thuggee cult. And it's called the Thuggee cult in both movies. Then there's a journey on elephants. Then they find this palace or temple. In the case of Cary Grant, he's heard legend of a palace that has a temple of gold, this kind of thing. So then the hero and his buddy witness, next slide, a ceremony of Thuggee cultists. They see this idol of Kali. There's this guru who happens to have the exact same cinematography that they used to show him in the film, which is kind of funny. They are tortured. They try to escape on a rope bridge. Then the Thuggees show up to try and stop them. And then the British show up to save them. So what I'm telling you is Temple of Doom, while not the most loved Indiana Jones film, is directly tying itself to a classic adventure story. It is not trying to be a follow-up to Raiders of the Lost Ark. It goes for broke to try and be its own movie. And so when you watch the movie Temple of Doom, in the famous scene where they're eating snakes and monkey brains, the British general who's sitting there at the table says, the Thuggee were an obscenity that worshipped Kali with human sacrifice. The British army nicely did away with them, which is Gunga Din. That's the movie he's referencing, and they talk about how it was 80 years before. Well, Gunga Din is set back in the 19th century. So Temple of Doom is a little more brilliant than I think a lot of people give it credit for. It has its flaws.
Kate
but,
Capshaw. Oh, sorry.
But I think it's a brilliant little movie, and I hope people will give it another watch.
Just what are you accusing Lucas and Spielberg of, Mike? Come on.
Well, yeah, they are kind of ripping off pretty fragrantly.
Or
but
they're paying homage. I mean, it's
Right.
not so much
That
that
works.
they're totally stealing. I think
almost a
it's done
sequel.
with like a
Right.
loving hand. Like, as much as I don't love George Lucas, that's a whole other thing. But Steven Spielberg, I think, genuinely appreciated the original film and was trying to sort of carry that over. So, moving into the 90s, it was sort of like mashup craziness. So it's not enough just to be an action-adventure quest hero. We want to like put an edge to it and see if we can like come up with new combinations, flavor combinations. So we're going to play a little math game with you guys and see, if you guys can guess what the combinations lead to. Like this plus this equals, okay, so we're going to start off with Indiana Jones plus Star Trek would give you what 90s film? Stargate.
he's a guy who's trying to solve the mystery of the pyramids and how they were built and all this kind of stuff. He's looking at all these ancient tablets and hieroglyphics. He's like the conspiracy theorist. So he's Indiana Jones, but then he finds himself sucked through a scientific portal wormhole.
Okay, this one's a little easier. Indiana Jones plus the Mummy gives you the Mummy. The new Mummy.
Yeah, you have a horror film combined with an adventure quest movie, and you get this entirely new hybrid, starring Brendan Fraser.
I'll be really impressed if anyone can guess this one, because I've actually never seen this movie. So,
I've seen it.
Operation Condor.
Yeah, so if you take Kung Fu and you combine it with Indiana Jones, you get Jackie Chan's salute to Raiders of the Lost Ark, which was in China it was called the Armor of God series. There was Armor of God 1 and then Armor of God 2, which was released here as Operation Condor as a standalone film. And it's a total send-up, not send-up, that's satirical, but it's a total salute to Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark. So.
And this was a little different. So we got Lara Croft plus Wayne's World. Don't know
Relic
if anyone's ever seen this show, but it's really special. It's got Tia Carrere as basically Lara Croft.
Syndicated show.
Yeah, it was bad.
It's bad. So if you're looking for like a Mystery Science Theater level thing to watch, there you go. So, but the 90s did video games really well. This is when all the adventure video games started really holding their own. And since I never played video games in the 90s, this one would be the one to talk to.
Well, if we remember video games that tried to do the Indiana Jones thing in the 80s, it was basically this. And you get one element to your video game, which is you get the traps and the pits, and maybe you run across a gold brick and pick it up as you're running around. It's Pitfall. But there's not really a lot going on here. It's simply just a running game. It's Super Mario Brothers with a different veneer put over it. A very primitive Super Mario Brothers.
Yeah. But it's so awesome.
It is awesome.
It makes me want to go home and play my
It's
Atari.
hypnotic. You can play it for hours. So in the 90s, the first one that's really of note is the Broken Sword series, and this is Shadow of the Templars. And this was animated by Don Bluth, who did Secret of Nim. He did American Tail. He did a number of amazing films. But he also did this video game the main character is George Stobart, and he gets caught in an explosion at a cafe in France, in Paris, and finds himself pulled into this quest to find the hidden origin of the Templars. And it's a really cool game, and what it accomplished as a video game was, for the first time, a video game gave you that sense of discovery, and it gave you the great writing that something like Raiders of the Lost Ark had. You felt like you were in a Raiders of the Lost Ark movie in the plotting and in the discovery.
Now, like a choose-your-own-adventure book.
It's like yes. But the one thing this game didn't have that the adventure film always has is the action element. It's a point-and-click adventure with your mouse. There's not really a lot of like fisticuffs and shooting that you can control or you can react to.
Didn't he also do like Dragon Quest and
I think you might be right. Yeah. Dragon's Lair. He did Dragon's Lair.
Dragon's Lair.
Yeah.
And Space Ace.
Yeah. So what ends up happening is this girl named Lara Croft shows up in the video game world. You might have heard of her. And for the first time, and it's directly inspired by Raiders of the Lost Ark, for the first time, the adventure game, the Adventure Quest game, allows you to have the plotting, have the great storyline, have the sense of discovery, and have the action all at the same time. Now, this
have
game
a rockin' awesome chick doing all of it, which is great.
And it solidified the female protagonist as a viable adventure hero. Yeah, so now let's talk about the 21st century. There are pros and cons to all eras. The 21st century adventure hero has evolved largely into a wisecracking, sort of sardonic character. I blame the mummy. But what you're finding with these characters, and we'll go into this a little bit, is that nothing really phases them, and they don't take anything seriously. And that's entertaining on the surface. I'm not saying it's all bad. But like, if you're not paying attention, you realize that you're not invested in it either, because it's all just plastic. But
yeah, it's sort of like, you know, if you've got Lara Croft and she's running around, you feel the tension. It's all being taken very seriously. You're like, oh crap, I might actually die here. Whereas, you know, something like Nathan Drake, you know, he's kind of making jokes the whole time. So you're like, it's fine. It's like Grand Theft Auto. It's awesome. It's not a big deal. I got this. So, a lot of the films that came out, with the exception of the Da Vinci Code, kind of have that same wry sense of humor thing that's going on with it. So the characters are all kind of, you know, making punny type, almost Buffy style jokes. It's very Whedon, like that whole, you know, making jokes in the middle of something that's really, if you were really in that moment, you're very unlikely to make comments like that. But it's entertaining to watch, you know.
Yeah, and that's one of the key things about this. And they even kind of interpreted Lara Croft that way in her first big screen adventure, which I think we all know is kind of mediocre. If you love it, I don't judge you, but it wasn't really the essence of the character. And she was also dressed in Matrix black, and she was kind of like, I'm not taking any of this seriously. This is all, it didn't really pan out. And like for the case of Atlantis, you have all the characters around the main character being sort of jokey and sardonic and ironic. Because the main character, played by Michael J. Fox, is sort of the David Spader type from Stargate. He's the guy who takes it seriously. He wants to get in there and really make things happen. And the rest of the characters, while they're on board with him, they're the ones cracking jokes and not really seeing anything as truly dangerous. The other thing about these movies that's interesting, with the exception of the Da Vinci Code, and in some cases the interpretation of Dirk Pitt from Sahara, although that movie, I think, really took liberties with that literary character. All of these characters are no longer the skeptic. They're the wacko that really believes it. So like in Indiana Jones...
So they're no longer Scully, they're Mulder.
Right. They're both now.
Yeah.
So what's happened is you've taken those two types of characters. In King Solomon's Mines, Deborah Kerr comes to Stuart Granger, Alan Quatermain, says, my father was looking for a lost diamond mine. Or my husband was looking for a lost diamond mine. And he's like, oh, that's a myth. That's something that's sold in every bazaar in this country. You just got hoodwinked. There's no diamond mine. But he's the one that can get her there, right? And he does, and then they eventually find the diamond mine. Indiana Jones, Marcus is the one that believes that the Lost Ark exists. Indy says it's a lot of magic and superstitious hocus pocus. Well, in these movies, even the Da Vinci Code, which takes itself very seriously as a story, Tom Hanks' character in that film, and then Benjamin Franklin Gates, and the guy in Atlantis, Michael J. Fox's character, they all believe what they're going after. They believe more than anyone else that the myth is real, which is a big shift from the characters in the past.
So this is another little thing to make you think.
This is Seahawk with Errol Flynn. It's a swashbuckling pirate adventure. And then, of course, Goonies. You get Pirates of the Caribbean, which is like the ultimate pirate mashup, because you get the pirate treasure quest, but that takes place within the swashbuckling adventure experience, action experience. So now we talk about Nathan Drake, who
is anyone familiar with Nathan Drake or Uncharted? Anyone play that game or, yeah?
Okay. Nathan Drake in Uncharted is a sort of like fortune hunter. He's an opportunist. A few years back, just to give you an idea of what his character is like, a few years back there was a viral campaign to try and get Hollywood to make a movie with this character and cast Nathan Fillion in the role of Nathan Drake, because that is his attitude. He is designed literally, not to sound like Rob Lowe in Parks and Rec, but he is designed literally after Johnny Knoxville from Jackass and Harrison Ford. And they took those two,
Jackass
and they
plus Indiana Jones equals
Nathan Drake. And so in this series of games, in the first game, he's looking for what he thinks is his ancestors' treasure. He thinks he's related to the famous explorer Drake, but he takes nothing seriously, to the point that while it's very entertaining to play the game because he's making jokes and he's doing all this kind of stuff, he's also breaking that fourth wall of reality. He is acknowledging the absurd situations that he's in. So it would be like if Indiana Jones was chasing the Ark on the truck, or he's on the rope bridge with the knife. He'd say something like, "I can't believe I'm on this rope bridge. This is insane." Like that's what Nathan Drake does. He
so
calls
it's
out
like
the
Indiana
situation.
Jones 4.
Well, I will say that Uncharted is far better than Indiana
I wasn't
Jones
trying
4.
to slam Uncharted.
It is an entertaining game to play. I mean, if you play it through, it's a ride. But it is a shift, because now the character there's no longer any, it's exciting, and there's some wild stuff going on, but you say to yourself, if I was in that situation, I don't think I could come up with a joke.
But
I think I'd probably be pretty scared.
The other thing about this character is that he's supposed to be much more like you or me. Like, he's wearing regular clothes, like tennis shoes and jeans. He's not wearing the cool fedora and has a bullwhip. He's just kind of more of a regular guy. And so he's not an archaeologist. He's not skilled in all these things and has all this knowledge. So it makes you feel more like in a way that you could be the one that's there because he's more like you. So I think that was what they intentionally designed him in that way.
But what's funny about that is that when they designed Indiana Jones, they said the same thing. They said, we're not going to make him like a martial artist who can kick everybody's butt. So it's like, okay, how average are we going to make these characters eventually? Like, is it eventually going to be the dude from the Warcraft episode in South Park that's just like at his computer, but he happens to be like an adventure?
The question becomes, and we can talk about this in a minute when we wrap this up, but does having that amount of averageness in the character make him more appealing or less believable as an action hero? Like, can you look at someone who's average as a hero? So that's just a question. I'd love to hear what you guys think about that.
Yeah, so the Da Vinci Code is the one sort of aberration in this where the movie really took itself seriously, much like Raiders of the Lost Ark. The one misstep that this movie made just from polarizing the audience is that I think the writer, Dan Brown, who wrote the original novel, he wrote a very compelling page-turner, but he also wrote a very controversial novel that polarized the audience. And so I think the misstep here was that yes, Christian mythology is an amazing thing, and biblical mythology. Indiana Jones handled it twice and did it really well. But what they did do was they were going after things that weren't negating what that object or that myth was. It wasn't that they were out to disprove or shift everything about the mythology. They were just trying to prove that it was real. Whereas this, it's like, we're talking about the origins of Christianity, and by the way, everything you think is wrong. And so an audience is going to be like, well, oh hell, and then so it made some people uncomfortable, but to its credit, it did take itself seriously, much like Raiders of the Lost Ark and King Solomon's Mines. And I can't go through this presentation without bringing this up. It's the elephant in the room that we have to talk about. Yeah. This was also, we are now living in the time that killed Indiana Jones as a franchise. And this character, while he was not quick-witted and witty in the humorous way like Nathan Drake, they just made him outright goofy. And this, you can see hints of this in Last Crusade, but it's not as pronounced as it is in this movie. In Last Crusade, there's a moment where they're looking for a hidden passage to get out of the castle, and Sean Connery sits down in a chair, and then this secret stairwell opens up, and there's this shot of Indy. He's like, whoa, 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 and then he falls down in this very goofy kind of expression, which is something you never would have seen happen in the previous two installments. Well, now in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, they've ratcheted that up further, and he's really just kind of a bumbling kind of buffoon through the whole movie. And so he's gotten so far afield.
Well, he is old.
Just because you're old, Clint Eastwood's old and he's still like really dangerous looking.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mess with Clint Eastwood in an alley. I'd be like, oh, it's an 80-year-old man who can totally kill me. I'm gone.
So that still would have been fine, like if he'd been old and making mistakes and goofy like old people like me are old. and yet with the story, I think people would have bought into it more without aliens and Shiloh.
Right. Because they also did.
There were a lot of things going on in this film, like the CGI monkeys and all the craziness that's going on in this.
Yeah, it was a big. It was.
Yeah, exactly.
It was a big misfire, and it also proved another element of Adventure Quest movies that people have gotten used to. One of the big criticisms levied against the film was the fact that it was about aliens, and they say no, that's science fiction. We want our quest heroes here, and we want our science fiction heroes here, and never the two shall meet. So please don't do that anymore. I don't know if the creator will actually listen to that, but
Yeah.
So
where are we going from here?
If we want to find out where the Adventure Quest hero is headed now, you don't have anywhere to look but the latest Tomb Raider game. That's the first place I would look because it was one of the biggest games of the year last year. Got rave reviews. And what's interesting about this particular development in the evolution of the adventure hero is that it's clearly, in my mind, a response to Nathan Drake. Nathan Drake had his trilogy. He had his run. He was super popular. He came off The Mummy and National Treasure and all those other characters that were always like winking at the camera and cracking jokes. Well, Tomb Raider has decided, you know what? People want the action, so we got to give them uncharted levels of action in their gameplay. But we're going to take it in the other direction. We're going to make this the most serious situation you can imagine. There's not going to be any humor in this at all. It's going to be, fight or flight kind of game. And a lot of people, when they saw these images of this Lara Croft, who's now a right out of college archaeology student, and she's all cut up and she's got a bow and arrow and stuff, they thought that it was inspired by Katniss in the Hunger Games. But what's interesting to me is that series like the Hunger Games, I think, were made possible in many ways because Lara Croft was popular in the 90s and she made female heroes viable. So I'm not trying to take anything away from the Hunger Games, what I'm about to say. I think what they don't realize, that the critics have said this, and a lot of people have made that observation, is that the situation that Lara Croft is in this game is not an engineered game show like the Hunger Games. It is not the same scenario at all. In fact, I believe Lara Croft's situation in this game is Rambo, because it's a survival situation where she has to, forget everything she knows about civilized society because these mercenaries are after her and all of her friends on this island. She was there for an archaeological expedition, but the boat wrecked. And now her first goal is to survive and save her friends from being murdered. The second ancillary goal happens to be, oh my gosh, as I'm running away from all the bullets flying around me and trying to get away from these psychos, I happen to notice that I'm in a temple ruin. Crap, keep running. Like, it's not really about the quest anymore until the last act. And even then, she's still trying to rescue somebody. It's all happening incidental to her. We'll get the raffle because we got to roll into another presentation. But thank you all so much for coming to this. Let's do the raffle and then we'll let you get out of
I drew
here.
our winner. So 319031.
I won.
Oh, lucky you! Hooray!
I don't know. I think you deserve a consolation prize for letting you watch Ghost Riders.
It was great.
Thank you all for coming to this. We're going to do a panel right after this in the same room on vintage toy restoration. So if you guys stick around, awesome. Also, if you haven't signed up for this, you can sign up to win a $50 Think Geek gift card that we're going to mail to the winner. So please come forward and do that if you haven't done it already.